liturgical year. These always help us out to know where we are. What does it say? Last Pentecost. This is a revision. It's long-standing, been called Christ the King Sunday, which I like better. And I'm going to tell you why. Christ the King Sunday is, if you think of the whole, you can even look on the calendar thing out on the wall there, you think of the entirety of the liturgical year, of the story of the prophecy of the Messiah in Advent, the coming of Christ in Bethlehem, the epiphanies that are revealed in the stories that follow the Christmas season, and Lent and Easter, and then the whole motion of Christ's teaching during the green season that just cycles year after year, right? There's this whole battery of texts that mark our worship, only to be punctuated on the last Sunday of the liturgical year, Christ the King Sunday. And you might have noticed in the text the theme, which is Christ is King. It's like the exclamation point on the liturgical year. If you've been sitting here Sunday after Sunday for the last 52 weeks, and you're still wondering what all this business is about, this Sunday gives you a chance to get it all straight. Christ, the King Sunday. So I like it. It's kind of a ending of the year, the beginning of the new year, but let's just be clear what we are doing here in the first place. Christ the King Sunday. We acclaim him as King and Lord. Now, that may seem strange to you, since the text of the gospel is this text that we normally hear in the springtime during the last week of Jesus' life, the scene of the crucifixion. Please don't miss what is so central to the message here of these texts. Jesus' kingship is defined by this event more than any other. He is a crucified king. He's not a king that uses political power or maneuvering or armies or the powers of this world, we might say. That's how you and I probably understand that language of kingship. Some of you are old enough to remember the coronation of Elizabeth II. Some of you do. I've only ever seen it on YouTube. But when you see it, if you've never seen it, you can go YouTube it up there. But it's wonderfully exalted and ritual and, just over the top. Investing in this person, in this grand ceremony, something that has been repeated throughout human history, of acclaiming someone as sovereign or queen or king, with the implication that they're, how's this word? This is one of my favorite words. They are the potentate. The one who holds the power. So we know in a way what kingship is or sovereignty is, but how bizarre it must seem if that's the only model you see and you do not understand the kingship of Christ that is demonstrated in this incredible story of God who becomes flesh and demonstrates all power and kingship by being crucified and then by rising. Our king is a crucified king. That messes most people up, because our understanding of kingship is not that. It is not, the word is kenosis. It's not somebody pouring out their power. It's coming with power and busting heads and taking names. That's how we understand kingship. I think I've used this example before. When I was a kid growing up in Portland, there was a empty lot block and a half away that was mainly a great big dirt pile. And all the kids from the neighborhood went there on a fairly regular basis. And since it rains a lot in Portland, we played on this big mud pile. And we would climb to the top and try to hold the power, right? King of the mountain. And we'd come home looking like we were sows. We just wallowed in this filth for hours. It was a lot of fun. But there wasn't one of us that didn't understand what we were doing. You got to be on top if you pushed everybody else off. Isn't that what kingship in most human terms looks like? But how strange then that the Christian message is entirely different than that. We have a crucified king who demonstrates the power of the living God by becoming flesh, by living our life, by dying our death, so that in our flesh we might be raised. In that deepest place of human suffering and sin, God speaks redemption. God participates in the redemption. Jesus is king, but he's not a king of this world. If you need an image for it, think of the crown of thorns. The crown of thorns is what was given to Jesus, not Queen Elizabeth's crown, that big sort of foo-foo thing on her head. That's not what Jesus got. He got the crown of thorns. It is for us the sign of his kingship that is like no other. It is God who has become flesh and who has died for you and for me and for all of creation to redeem the creation. Very different than the powers of this world. But it is the central proclamation of the church. Jesus is king. He's king of love. He is king of glory, king of redemption. I mean, we just sang, "Crown him with many crowns," did we not? One of my favorite hymns of all time. So here's the thing. If that messes you up, the whole cross thing, that's good, because that means that it's getting to you, it's disturbing you. If it doesn't make you sort of stumble and question and sort of shake your head, you're not getting it yet. Because there is nothing easy about saying that the God of all, the Lord of all, comes to us in crucifixion, in death and suffering, to raise up all sinners to new life. There's nothing easy. In fact, in the New Testament, it refers to it as a scandal. It is scandalous. The first followers of Jesus are the first people who heard Jesus, and then those who heard after through the apostles and so on. This was a stumbling block for them. They're like, okay, well, if he's God, he just got killed. Like, what kind of a God is that? It's kind of whippy, kind of weak. What are you talking about? And it is hard for us. I was reading online the other day, just so this is weird why I was reading this, but it was a Wikipedia page, and I was reading about Hitler. Don't ask why. I can't even remember why. It was something about his writings and so on. And there was this quote in there, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is it. And the quote is, I'm not going to remember it exactly, but the essence of it was that Christianity was such a false religion. That the world would have been done much better to embrace Islam or another religion, because Christianity is flabby. It is weak. It purports to lift up and exalt the image of a crucified king. Well, of course he would say that, right? So how do you feel about this crucified king. Well, I want to tell you about Paul here. And in order to do this, so I have to come back to this. This business here of the title. There are a couple reasons why this got changed. And I just throw them out there for your contemplation. But one of the reasons is that the language of kingship is somewhat problematic for those of us who don't live in that. We see it on TV or YouTube or whatever. It's out there. We don't necessarily live under monarchy. So the language is challenging that way. It's more abstract for us. And it's also male. Christ the King. So, there's an effort in postmodern church to is it really necessary to refer to kingship? Is this going to confuse people about the real essence of Jesus' ministry? And I'm not confused by it. If you are, I can understand, sort of, where that comes from. But I think the language, first of all, is biblical. We have to contend with it then. And it's also not really about king as much as it is about power. And that, I think, we can sink our teeth into. But it's like this. If you're confused about it, I'm going to cut you some slack. I'm going to help you and give you an image. If the language of Jesus is king, king of all, Lord of lords, if that doesn't work for you, think of it like this. Jesus is the boss over everything. Jesus is the boss over everything. Is that helpful? More helpful? Well, it's not that helpful if your boss is not someone that you have great affection for or want to work for or what have you. I grant that. I'm going to tell you a side story here. Years ago, my first job, I was 15, and I worked at a retirement center in Portland that had, it was a big high-rise kind of a place, apartments, and it had a common dining room, kitchen for the residents who would come, especially at dinner time. So I worked in the kitchen, and I worked in the dining room, serving meals and so on. And, I had this dorky little waitress uniform. It was burgundy, and it had sort of stripes, it had a bow tie, and I had to take the train. Max was kind of new at that point. I took the train. I didn't drive yet, so I had to take the train wearing my little uniform. It was just, it was a trial. It was a trial. But I did it, and I made some money, and it was a good little job, and whatever. So a couple months into that job, I came home, and my aunt and uncle had come down from the Seattle area. They were visiting, and I came in, and I was really tired, and I took my little bow tie and kind of had it hanging down, I was tired, and I sat down, and my uncle congratulated me, said, "Oh, Patti, this is so great. Now you can share in the American dream." And I said, "Really? What dream is that?" And he said, "Well, the dream of telling off your boss." The dream that most working people sort of, dream of or fantasize about, especially on a hard day. And I was like, oh. Hadn't really thought about that, but over my lifetime here, I think there's a truth there he was trying to tell me. That most of us regard the people in authority over us with some less than willing association. Well, that's important. I think there's good reason for all of that, but I want you to think about this for a second. If that's true of our working life, day in and day out for 40-some years, if that's true of our working life, of how we regard the people who have authority over us or supervise our work or what have you, how does that deal in your spirit when the texts say, or the claim of the church says, Jesus is king of all, he is boss over everything? Because I would suggest to you that we often have the same attitude towards God as we do towards our boss. That is, I'll recognize your authority, but, there's a limit to that. There are limits to how much I'll allow you to have authority my ethics or whatever. It's very common, wouldn't you say? I will be the boss. I am the boss. Oh, how difficult it is, then, to hear the message of the gospel, in which the claim of the New Testament is that Jesus is boss. He is king over all. I recognize now that you got very quiet, that perhaps you're a little bit uncomfortable. That's okay, I'm going to make you more uncomfortable. Yeah, because that's what this does. That's what this does. There is no part of your life that God does not lay claim to. That's what this is suggesting. That's what Paul's suggesting. I want to move over to Colossians. Because this, if you have any confusion at all about what the church has meant or means today about the kingship of Christ, this passage from Colossians chapter 1 is the corrective. And it's like Paul sort of transported into some sort of fit of ecstasy, or he suddenly became a Baptist preacher, and he just kind of went off. And I want you to hear it again, because the language here is so different than that gospel passage of Jesus' last moments. This is language of great worship and exaltation, and huge claims about what it means that we follow Christ. First of all, he starts with this great blessing. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from his glorious power. May you be prepared to endure everything with patience, while joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. What a great blessing that is. But then he goes off. Paul just goes up. He has rescued us from the power of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption. If you don't know what redemption is, the forgiveness of sins. He spells it out. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers, all things have been created through him and for him. Jesus is the boss. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. I can't tell you how many times at church convention meetings I want to get up to the microphone and just start reading this. He is the head of the body of the church. You know, that's a word from our sponsor. You know, wait a minute. That's not about us. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. It's the cross, you see, where his kingship is most fully realized. And this great line, so that he might come to have first place in everything. Does he have first place in you? I mean, it's a very wonderful philosophical statement, a declaration of, sort of praise and worship. It almost preaches itself. But it doesn't mean squat. If he doesn't have first place in you, in your life, in your thoughts, in your ethics, if he is not the boss over everything, and if you find that disturbing, it's only just beginning. Because to walk with God, every part of your life starts to get claimed by the love of God and the ethics of the kingdom of God. And that upside down thing Jesus' way. That's not the cross. The cross was an incredible confidence that even in death, God is still supreme. And that's the gift that Jesus gives us. That's the gift of salvation. That's the gift. That not only our physical, mortal, this old this old piece of clay, if you haven't come to the realization yet, it's not forever. I mean, I wake up daily and everything makes its own little song as I creak and, it reminds me on a daily basis. It's not forever. But what is forever? The life that God gives us and speaks to us through Christ. Sin can't stop it. Not even mortal flesh can stop it. God's love, God's power, God's life, it flows to us through the cross. That is where the kingship of Christ is supreme. And so you and I, we join with Paul. We sing these great hymns, Crowned with Many Crowns. We're about to sing another song, Majesty. We're going to sing number 51, How Great Thou Art. We'll probably lift the roof if we can sing all of that, because there is this profound sense that we have of his presence with us. And his power that is the power of love. And a new life. I say keep it Christ the King. Last Pentecost sounds funny to me. As if Pentecost is just going to cut off. There'll be no Holy Spirit now. It's a funny, I don't like it. Go back to the other language. Problematic, that's all right. There isn't anything about Christianity that isn't in some way problematic. Let's just embrace it and wrestle with it and try to figure out what it means in its essence. He is Lord of all. He is King of kings. That he might have first place in everything.